They said music was the only language he could still see, but no one told her that within his melodies lived the secrets of a billion-dollar empire. The hospital was a place of monotony, white walls, endless corridors, and the smell of antiseptic that never truly faded. But hidden within those dull walls was a room that seemed to exist outside of time. From that room came the sound of music, notes rising and falling like whispered prayers. The piano stood in the corner, its black and white keys alive under the touch of Adrian, a blind pianist whose world had been consumed by darkness years ago. Every day, Adrian's hands glided over the keys with such grace that even the nurses paused in their rounds to listen. His music was not just sound, it was a confession, a cry, and sometimes a smile. Though he couldn't see the world anymore, he painted it with melodies that carried both pain and beauty. Emma, a young nurse known for her discipline and focus, found herself strangely drawn to those melodies. The first time she heard them, she froze in the hallway. Her heart inexplicably stirred. She peeked inside, expecting to see a musician rehearsing for an audience. Instead, she saw a patient, eyes clouded by blindness, face calm yet distant, fingers moving with a kind of desperate tenderness over the piano keys. From that day forward, Emma's steps slowed every time she passed his room. She told herself it was just curiosity, just admiration for the way he played. But she began to stay longer, leaning against the doorframe, listening in silence. Adrian, though blind, sensed her presence. A faint smile would appear on his lips, as if her quiet company was part of his song. Their first real conversation happened almost by accident. Emma had gone in to check his vitals, clipboard in hand, when Adrian suddenly stopped playing. "You always stand by the door," he said softly, startling her. "Why don't you come closer?" Emma blinked. "You knew I was there?" "I may not have eyes," he replied with a small smirk, "but I can hear the way your breathing changes when I play." His words disarmed her. No one had ever noticed something so subtle about her. Against her own rules, Emma pulled up a chair. That night, instead of rushing through her duties, she stayed, listening as Adrian spoke little, but played much. What Emma didn't know was that behind Adrian's blindness and quiet smile was a truth she could not imagine. He wasn't just a man healing in a hospital bed. He was the heir to an empire, the only son of a family whose wealth reached billions. Yet in that sterile room, he wanted none of it. All he wanted was the music hand, the nurse who unknowingly had already begun to heal his broken world. Emma had always been careful about drawing lines with her patients. Professionalism was something she guarded fiercely. But with Adrian, those lines blurred in ways she couldn't explain. She began looking forward to the end of her rounds, when she could sit quietly in his room and let his music wash over her tired mind. The more time she spent there, the more she realized Adrian wasn't like other patients. He rarely complained about his condition, rarely asked for help. Instead, he seemed to pour everything he felt into the piano, as though each key held a piece of his soul. His blindness wasn't what defined him, it was his resilience, the way he refused to let darkness consume him entirely. One evening, Emma found him sitting silently by the piano, his hands resting on his knees instead of the keys. The room felt emptier without the sound of music. She frowned and stepped closer. "You're not playing tonight?" she asked gently. Adrian tilted his head slightly, turning toward her voice. "Not every night is meant for music. Sometimes the silence speaks louder." Emma sat down beside him, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. And what does your silence say tonight?" He smiled faintly, his blind eyes gazing into nothingness. "It says I was waiting for someone to fill it." Her heart skipped. She looked down at her hands, trying to ignore the warmth creeping into her chest. Adrian had a way of saying things that pierced through her walls, words that felt both accidental and intentional. She told herself not to read too much into it, yet the moment lingered in her mind long after her shift ended. In the days that followed, their conversations deepened. Adrian asked her about her childhood, about her favorite memories, and about the dreams she once held. No one had asked Emma those questions in years. She surprised herself with how easily the answers spilled out about how she once dreamed of becoming a painter, how she loved capturing sunsets and city lights, but gave it up when life pushed her into nursing. Adrian listened intently, then moved his fingers to the piano. Without asking, he began to play a melody that sounded like colors coming alive, bright, hopeful, warm. Emma closed her eyes, and for a fleeting moment, she imagined her old canvases again, her hands covered in paint, her heart alive with creativity. When the song ended, Adrian said quietly, "You may think you stopped painting, but I think you just changed your canvas. You still create, you just do it in different ways now." His words struck her deeply. She had never thought of it that way. For years, she carried the guilt of abandoning her dream. But here was a blind pianist reminding her that life could still be art, even if it didn't look the way she once imagined. That night, as she prepared to leave, Adrian reached for the scarf around his neck. "Emma," he said softly, "thank you for being here." She blinked, caught off guard. "You don't have to thank me. It's my job." "No," Adrian said firmly, shaking his head. "You're here when you don't have to be. That makes all the difference." Emma left the room with her chest heavy and her thoughts tangled. She knew she was crossing into dangerous territory. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise, she couldn't deny it. She was falling for him. What she didn't know was that outside those hospital walls, a storm was quietly brewing. Adrian's absence from the world of wealth and business hadn't gone unnoticed. Relatives who craved his inheritance had started asking questions. His silence made them restless, and soon they would come looking for him. But for now, in that room filled with music and unspoken emotions, it was just Adrian and Emma, two souls unknowingly stepping deeper into a love that would soon be tested by truths neither of them were ready to face. Emma's colleagues had begun to notice the change in her routine. She spent longer hours in Adrian's room, sometimes staying even after her official shift ended. The whispers among the nurses grew louder, small remarks traded in the break room.
"Ow.
"She's too attached to that patient," one of them muttered. "I heard she spends half her evenings listening to him play," another giggled. Emma ignored the gossip, though deep inside, their words unsettled her. She reminded herself it wasn't what they thought. She was just being kind, just supporting a man who needed it. But late at night, when she replayed their conversations and the way his music made her heart ache, she knew she was lying to herself. One evening, after finishing a particularly exhausting shift, Emma entered Adrian's room and found him already playing. The melody was soft, almost fragile, like the sound of a confession struggling to escape. She leaned against the doorframe, closing her eyes, letting the music wash over her. Without stopping, Adrian said, "You always stand there before you come in." Emma smiled faintly. "Maybe I like listening from the shadows first, or maybe," Adrian countered gently. "You're afraid of stepping closer to me," her breath caught. His words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She finally walked in, taking the chair beside him. "You think too much?" she whispered. "Blindness gives me time to think," he said with a small smile. "But it also teaches me to feel more, feel things others miss." Their conversation that night stretched longer than ever. Adrian asked about her childhood sketches, about the colors she missed painting with. Emma told him about a small box under her bed filled with unfinished canvases, the remnants of a dream she had abandoned. Adrian listened, his fingers unconsciously tracing the piano keys, as though her words themselves were notes. "Why did you stop?" he asked quietly. "Because life doesn't wait for art," Emma said bitterly. "My family needed me to earn, to work, to survive. Brushes don't pay bills." Adrian's voice was soft but firm. "Maybe one day you'll realize survival isn't living. Living is when you choose what makes your soul breathe." Emma fell silent, her throat tightening. She hated how easily he peeled back her layers, how clearly he saw into her heart, despite never laying eyes on her face. That night, before she left, Adrian reached for something under his pillow. He handed her a small folded piece of paper. She frowned, opening it to see a few lines written in Braille. "I know you can't read it," he said gently, "but it's a melody I wrote today. I thought maybe you'd want to keep it." Emma clutched the paper to her chest, her eyes burning with unshed tears. It wasn't diamonds. It wasn't flowers. It was something far more intimate. A piece of his soul, given only to her. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, Adrian's family grew restless. Lawyers discussed his prolonged absence. His cousins whispered about dividing shares. The press began speculating about the heir who had vanished from public life. In quiet boardrooms, decisions were being made without him, plots woven to strip him of control. Adrian knew the storm was coming, but when Emma was beside him, listening to his music as if it were the only truth that mattered, allowed himself to forget for just a little while that the empire was waiting to devour him. The days passed in a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Emma would finish her rounds, then quietly slip into Adrian's room, where the piano waited like an old friend. Their bond deepened with every passing hour, every shared silence, and every melody that seemed to belong only to them. But with closeness came fear. Emma felt at first a quiet, nagging worry that what she was allowing herself to feel was crossing boundaries she had sworn never to break. She was a nurse. He was her patient. Yet when Adrian spoke, when his blind eyes turned toward her as if he could see her soul, those lines blurred until they were impossible to find. One night the hospital was unusually quiet. Rain lashed against the windows, and the corridors echoed with the steady hum of fluorescent lights. Emma found Adrian sitting at the piano, his fingers hovering but not pressing the keys. He seemed lost in thought. "You're not playing tonight?" she asked softly, stepping closer. Adrian turned his head toward her, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to see you, to know the face behind the voice that's become my world." Emma's breath caught. She opened her mouth to respond but found no words. Her throat tightened as she fought against the emotions surging inside her. She wanted to tell him that her face didn't matter, that what they shared was deeper than appearances. But all she managed was a whisper. "You don't need to see me, Adrian. You already do." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the storm outside. Then Adrian reached for her hand. His touch was careful, tentative, but when his fingers finally closed around hers, Emma felt her heart pound in a way that scared her. he said softly. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, hope." Her chest tightened. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. She tried to pull her hand away, but he held it just long enough to make her feel the weight of his words before letting go. Later that night, Emma returned to her small apartment, unable to sleep. She kept hearing his voice, replaying the way he had said her name, the way he had admitted to needing her. She pressed the folded braille sheet he had given her against her heart, wondering how something so small could mean so much. But as Emma battled with her growing feelings, Adrian fought a different war. In the quiet of his room, away from Emma's presence, he would answer the phone calls he had ignored for weeks. Lawyers demanding his return, family members questioning his decisions, cousins plotting behind his back. Every call reminded him of the truth he was hiding from Emma, that he was on T, just a blind pianist in a hospital. He was the heir to a fortune, the last thread holding together an empire worth billions. And with each passing day, the weight of that secret grew heavier. Adrian knew he couldn't keep it from her forever, but he was terrified of what would happen once she knew. Would she look at him differently? Would she pull away, thinking that every moment they shared was just another story of a rich man playing vulnerable? So he stayed silent, clinging desperately to the fragile bubble they had created. For Adrian, Emma wasn't just a nurse. She was freedom. She was honesty. She was the first person in years who saw him without the shadow of his last name. And losing her was a risk he wasn't ready to take. The first crack in their fragile world came on a Sunday afternoon. Emma had just entered Adrian's room with a tray of tea when she noticed a man in a tailored suit standing near the piano. His posture was rigid, his eyes sharp, the kind of gaze that belonged more in boardrooms than hospital corridors. "Who are you?" Emma asked, surprised. The man didn't answer her immediately. Instead, he turned toward Adrian, who sat silently on the bed, his hands folded in his lap. "Adrian," the man said coldly. "You've been hiding long enough." Emma froze. Her mind stumbled over the name. Adrian. Not Mr. Wells. Not the patient in room 47. Adrian. It felt suddenly heavier, important, like it belonged to someone she didn't fully know. Adrian's face tightened. "Not now, Thomas," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. The man's eyes flicked toward Emma. "And who is she? Another nurse keeping you comfortable while the empire crumbles?" Emma's chest tightened. "Empire? What empire?" She set the tray down quietly, trying to make sense of the conversation. Adrian's tone sharpened. "Leave her out of this." Thomas scoffed. "You don't get to leave people out of this? You're Adrian Wells, heir to Wells Global. You disappear for months. Let the vultures circle. Now. And now, I find you here playing piano for strangers, while the board threatens to strip your inheritance." Emma felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Billion-dollar empire. Heir Wells Global. She stared at Adrian, searching for denial, for some explanation that would make the words a cruel mistake. But Adrian sat there, silent, his head bowed like a man exposed. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice trembling. "Adrian, is it true?" He lifted his face slowly, blind eyes turned toward her, his jaw tight with shame. "Yes, it's true." The room fell into heavy silence. Emma's thoughts spun out of control. She had poured her heart into believing she understood him, that he was just a gifted pianist, broken but human, someone who needed her as much as she needed him. And yet here was a truth so vast it threatened to rewrite everything. Thomas broke the silence with a sneer. "Pack your things, Adrian. You're coming back with me." The board meeting is in 3 days. If you don't show, they'll move to vote you out permanently. Adrian clenched his fists. Not yet. Not ready. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Not ready to fight for your future? Not ready to leave her? Emma's chest burned. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but her throat locked. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked out, her footsteps echoing in the sterile hallway. Adrian's voice called after her, raw and desperate. "Emma, please wait." But she didn't stop. For the first time since they met, his voice no longer reached her the way it once did. That night, Emma sat in her apartment staring at the braille sheet he had given her. The melody was still there, but the meaning had changed. She was unsure if she had fallen for a man or for a carefully hidden story that was never hers to begin with. Meanwhile, Adrian remained in his hospital room, his heart breaking in silence. The piano sat untouched, its keys waiting for his hands. But for the first time in years, Adrian couldn't bring himself to play, because this time, it wasn't blindness that silenced him. It was the fear of losing the only person who had ever loved him without knowing his name. Emma avoided Adrian for days. She still worked her shifts at the hospital, but she stopped going to his room unless duty required it. No more late-night conversations, no more listening to his music, no more secret smiles in the quiet corridors. She kept her distance, convincing herself it was the right thing to do. After all, how could she, a nurse, barely keeping her own life together, fit into the world of billion-dollar empires and boardroom wars? But distance didn't silence her heart. Every time she walked past room 47, she felt his absence like a sharp ache. She could hear the piano sometimes, faint melodies seeping under the door, and it tore her apart because the music sounded different now, lonelier, heavier, filled with a kind of desperation she couldn't ignore. One evening, as Emma was about to leave the hospital, she saw Thomas in the parking lot. He was on the phone, his voice clipped and impatient. "Yes, the board is set. If Adrian doesn't show, he's finished. His shares will be absorbed. Wells Global will move on without him." Emma froze. She didn't understand corporate jargon, but she understood the weight of those words. Adrian wasn't just hiding, he was about to lose everything. That night, sleep abandoned her. She lay awake replaying every conversation she had with Adrian, the way he encouraged her to paint again, the way he said she gave him hope, the way his fingers had lingered on hers as though she was his anchor. He hadn't lied to hurt her. He had lied because he feared losing the one place where he was indeed defined by wealth or legacy. The next morning, Emma walked into his room before her shift officially began. Adrian sat at the piano, his hands hovering but not pressing the keys. His face turned toward her instantly, as if he had been waiting. "I didn't think you'd come," he whispered. Emma swallowed hard, her voice soft but steady. "You should have told me." "I wanted to," Adrian admitted, his voice breaking. "But every time I opened my mouth, I imagined the look on your face changing. I didn't want to be Adrian Wells, the heir. I just wanted to be Adrian, the man who plays piano for the woman who listens like no one else does." Emma's eyes burned with unshed tears. She sat down beside him, her hands trembling. "You're asking me to step into a world I don't belong in." Adrian turned his blind gaze toward her, his expression fierce despite his vulnerability. "You belong wherever you choose to stand, Emma, and if you choose to stand with me, then that world will never scare me again." The room was quiet for a long time. Emma's heart battled with her mind. Every practical thought screamed at her to walk away. But every beat of her heart whispered that leaving him would hurt more than any risk she could ever take. Finally, she reached for his hand. Her fingers slipped into his, and this time, she didn't pull away. "Then let's face it together," she whispered. For the first time in days, Adrian smiled, a real, unguarded smile that softened his entire face. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles, a silent vow of gratitude and love. But as they sat together, the storm outside their fragile sanctuary grew fiercer. The board meeting was only 2 days away, and Adrian's family was in tea, planning to let him walk back into his empire with kindness. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about survival. The morning of the board meeting arrived like a storm Emma couldn't escape. Adrian had insisted she come with him, even though she protested, saying she didn't belong in those halls of power. But Adrian refused to go alone. "I need you there," he told her firmly. "Not as a nurse, not as someone out of place, just as Emma, the one who sees me." And so, dressed in the simplest outfit she owned, Emma found herself stepping out of a sleek black car into the marble steps of Wells Global's towering headquarters. The building gleamed like a monument to wealth and ambition, its glass walls reflecting the sky, its doors opening to a world she had never imagined entering. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Men and women in suits whispered, their eyes darting toward Adrian as he walked with his cane, Emma at his side. Some nodded politely, others smirked as if already dismissing him. "Look at him," one voice murmured. "Blind, weak, he'll never lead." "Who's the girl?" Another sneered. "His nurse." Emma's cheeks burned, but Adrian's grip on her hand tightened slightly, steadying her. He moved forward with a calm dignity that silenced even the boldest whispers. When they entered the boardroom, the tension reached its peak. The long table was lined with men and women in sharp suits, each with files and tablets in front of them. At the head sat Thomas, his expression cool and calculating. Adrian, Thomas began smoothly, "Welcome back. We were starting to think you'd abandoned us entirely." Adrian's blind eyes turned toward the sound of his cousin's voice. "You'd like that, wouldn't you? But I'm here." The boardroom fell quiet. Emma sat slightly behind Adrian, watching as he placed both hands on the table, his posture straight and unshaken. "You think my blindness makes me unfit," Adrian said, his voice firm. "You think because I chose to heal instead of fight in your endless power games, I've lost my right to lead. But leadership isn't about sight, it's about vision. Mine has never been clearer." Murmurs rippled around the table. Thomas smirked. "Vision. You're dreaming, cousin. Wells Global needs strength, not sentiment." The morning of the board meeting arrived like a storm Emma couldn't escape. Adrian had insisted she come with him, even though she protested, saying she didn't belong in those halls of power. But Adrian refused to go alone. "I need you there," he told her firmly. "Not as a nurse, not as someone out of place, just as Emma, the one who sees me." And so, dressed in the simplest outfit she owned, Emma found herself stepping out of a sleek black car into the marble steps of Wells Global's towering headquarters. The building gleamed like a monument to wealth and ambition, its glass walls reflecting the sky, its doors opening to a world she had never imagined entering. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Men and women in suits whispered, their eyes darting toward Adrian as he walked with his cane, Emma at his side. Some nodded politely, others smirked as if already dismissing him. "Look at him," one voice murmured. "Blind, weak, he'll never lead." "Who's the girl?" Another sneered. "Nurse." Emma's cheeks burned, but Adrian's grip on her hand tightened slightly, steadying her. He moved forward with a calm dignity that silenced even the boldest whispers. When they entered the boardroom, the tension reached its peak. The long table was lined with men and women in sharp suits, each with files and tablets in front of them. At the head sat Thomas, his expression cool and calculating. Adrian Thomas began smoothly, "Welcome back. We were starting to think you'd abandoned us entirely." Adrian's blind eyes turned toward the sound of his cousin's voice. "You'd like that, wouldn't you? But I'm here." The boardroom fell quiet. Emma sat slightly behind Adrian, watching as he placed both hands on the table, his posture straight and unshaken. "You think my blindness makes me unfit?" Adrian said, his voice firm. "You think because I chose to heal instead of fight in your endless power games, I've lost my right to lead? But leadership isn't about sight, it's about vision. Mine has never been clearer." Murmurs rippled around the table. Thomas smirked. "Vision? A dreaming cousin?" "Wells Global needs strength, not sentiment." Adrian's tone sharpened. "Strength without humanity's tyranny. And sentiment, as you call it, is what makes this empire more than just numbers on a balance sheet. It's what my father built it on, and it's what I'll continue." Emma felt her heart swell. He wasn't just defending his position, he was showing them the man she knew. Fierce, passionate, unafraid to be vulnerable, yet unbreakable at his core. But Thomas wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom. "And what about her?" He gestured toward Emma. "Your nurse, your companion. Do you expect us to believe she belongs in this world of power? Or is she just another weakness you can't let go of?" The room shifted, all eyes landing on Emma. Her throat tightened, her palms sweating. She wanted to vanish under their scrutiny, to escape the piercing judgment in their stares. But before she could speak, Adrian rose slowly from his chair. He turned his blind gaze toward the board, his voice steady and unyielding. "She is not my weakness," he declared. "She is my strength. She is the reason I'm standing here today instead of surrendering to despair. If you see her as unworthy, then you don't understand what worth truly is. If that's the kind of leadership you want, then perhaps you don't deserve me." Silence thundered through the room. No one moved. No one breathed. Even Thomas's smirk faltered. Emma's eyes stung with tears. In that moment, she didn't feel like a nurse dragged into a world too big for her. She felt like someone who mattered, someone who belonged exactly where she was. The vote began. One by one, board members raised their hands. For Adrian, against him. The room swayed with tension, every second stretching like an eternity. When the final count was announced, the result was undeniable. Adrian had won, by the narrowest margin, but he had won. He turned his face toward Emma, his expression unreadable to everyone else. But she saw it the small, trembling smile of a man who had just fought for his life and refused to lose. And in that moment, Emma realized something too. She wasn't just standing beside Adrian. She was walking into his world, ready or not, because he had already become hers. When the boardroom emptied and the last of the whispers faded into the marble corridors, Adrian sat back in his chair, exhausted but victorious. Emma stayed close, her hand still in his, steadying him in silence. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with pride. Adrian turned his blind eyes toward her. "No, we did it. I couldn't have stood there without you. For the first time since she met him, Emma let the truth flow freely. You terrify me, Adrian, not because of who you are, but because of how much I care. I've spent my life building walls, keeping my dreams locked away, and then you came along and broke through all of it. Adrian reached for her hand, tracing her fingers as though memorizing their shape. Emma, I don't need sight to know what I feel. I may be heir to an empire, but none of it matters without someone who sees me. And you see me better than anyone ever has. Her heart swelled, the weight of every doubt dissolving into something undeniable. Slowly she leaned closer, resting her forehead against his. In the quiet of that moment, with the city lights glowing beyond the windows, she finally allowed herself to say the words that had been burning inside her. Love you, Adrian. His breath caught. Small, trembling smile curved across his lips as his hands framed her face gently. And I've loved you from the moment you first listened. I listened to my music.